Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. We do the Maimer 40 years ago of Shabbos Parshas Shelach, Mevorchim Taamuz. We're in the days that are leading up to Gimel Taamuz, the Yom Hilula, the Yartzeit of the Rebbe, Chassidic, Torah of the Rebbe, as we do, always to increase our hiskashrus, our bond to the Rebbe, and to glean energy, inspiration, and strength through the Rebbe's Torah in our lives to grow, overcome challenges, and to come closer to God. Eem Chafetz Banu Havaya v'Hevi Sonu el Oretz Hazeis v'Nosna Lonu Eretz Asher Hi Zovas Cholav Udavosh. This week we read the troubling story of Moses sending the spies to the Holy Land to check it out before the Jewish people go. And the Rebbe will analyze the story and give a very interesting perspective, the perspective of Chassidus and Kabbalah, and the way it is, and the way the story went down. And the story is well known, very famous. The spies were sent. 10 spies came back with a lousy report. And the 2 spies, Caleb, and Joshua, Yeshua, they said that we will be able to conquer the land. So the Maimer begins with a verse of their report, the report of Kalev and Yeshua, who say, if God wants us, He will bring us to this land, and He will give us the land which is flowing with milk and honey. And before that, a verse earlier, it says, Teiva ha'aretz ma'ed ma'ed. The land is very, very good. So it's the last verse in yesterday's Parsha Chumash and the first verse of today's. And they're talking, and they're telling the people who were upset about the report of the 10 spies. And we know, it's known, this specific lesson that our Rabbi, that the Rebbe's, our leaders, taught, generally speaking, about the whole idea of the spies. Starting in the Likkutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe, and in the Mevorchim of the subsequent Rabbi, we have to understand the whole idea of the spies. It's a very troubling story. We learned in the beginning of the Parsha that when Moses sent them, Rashi comments that at the time that they were sent, they were fit, they were kosher, they were upright people. They were prominent people of the congregation. They were important people. When they were, as a matter of fact, they were leaders. They were leaders of the tribes. They were princes of their tribes. So then why didn't they want to go into the land of Israel? Etc. Makes no sense, the whole story. Especially since they were the emissaries of Moses, of our teacher Moses. Like it says in the beginning of the Parsha, God tells Moses to send, but it doesn't just say to send. That would mean shlach. It says shlach lecha, send for yourself. So, for yourself, the sages comment that means l'daitcha, because you feel it's appropriate, you feel it's the right thing to do. So I'm telling you that you could do it. But this is really something that Moses wanted to do. But now there's a much deeper meaning to this. Shaho yukshurim imidas shel meisha. Sfiras Hadas, they were connected with the attribute of Moses, which is the attribute and the characteristic of Das. Das is knowledge. That's the result. That's the result after an idea has been developed, chokhmah and bina, with the wisdom and its understanding, giving it dimension, and having an actual product, that's das, that's Moses. Moses is actuality. And this is, they were connected to him on that level. They were his emissaries, and the Talmud tells us that an emissary, the law is like they're exactly like the one who sends them, regarding any transaction that somebody sends someone else to do. It's like their hand is their hand, etc. This shows us how great they were. From the mere fact that Moses chose them specifically to be his emissaries, it's not understood how did they mess up so badly, etc. afterwards. And even more so, it's not understood the mere fact that they went on a mission from Moses to spy out the land, this should have themselves improved them, made them even greater people. This particular deed should have affected them to growth. They should even become greater. And we see this from the mere fact that they went to the Holy Land, and the Holy Land is indeed very, very good. And if that's the case, then their being in Israel actually did elevate them. So how did we get this negative result? Now, besides the fact that also what they said about the land of Israel was according to the actual command and mission that Moses sent them on. They have to tell the truth. They have to see it, tell it like they saw it, and tell it like it is. So that wasn't itself the sin. Let's say they just said, look, there's some tough people there. We better come well prepared. That should be the point. Not that, they're tough people and we won't be able to do it. That was their mistake. But the first part where they say there are the giants there, that was okay. This is what they told the children of Israel. And like Rashi says later on, when it says that they died, it says those that spoke the gossip of the land. The word diba, which means gossip, just means descriptive words that can form an opinion. So therefore there could be good gossip and bad gossip, so to speak. Colloquially, when we say the word gossip in English, usually it means something bad about somebody. But really, gossip also means something maybe unknown, something which could be good in theory. So the word diba, Rashi is explaining what it is. So diba sa'oras just means they had to say what was going on there. V'yeshna l'toiva could be for good. Hainu she'etzem diburam v'hoitzos hadiba hoyev shalias l'toiva. So the mere fact that they spoke and the gossip that they said could have been for good. So then you can understand how this should have increased their stature and their level, and it should have affected them for the good. They should have become better people. Nevertheless, they did not want to go into the land of Israel, and they messed up. So to explain it, that mere fact that they even grew in their stature was the cause of their mistake. The reason why the spies didn't want to go into the land of Israel is because of their stature. The spies were from the people of the generation that left Egypt. That was the generation that was in the desert, which are called the generation of knowledge. They were on a very high level, extremely high level. and when it says the generation of knowledge, they had the supernal knowledge of God. And they weren't just in that generation. They were the princes of the generation, the leaders of the generation. Not only that, they were also the emissaries of Moses and Aaron and all the 600,000 Israelites, the the emissaries like them. So they represented everybody. But specifically they were the emissaries of Moshe. Rabbeinu, the mere fact that Moses chose them, that shows their stature, how great they were. And the mere fact that Moses chose them, Moses was the leader and the prince of the generation. And this, especially Moses was the special shepherd, the faithful shepherd, the shepherd of faith. That what he did, like the Rebbe explains in the mimer that we actually, the last mimer that the Rebbe edited and gave us on Purim Cotton, 57, 52, distributed to everyone. And we study that traditionally on the 3rd of Taamuz, and the Rebbe's Yartzeit there. The Rebbe talks at length about Moses, and that he gave us, he satiated us with faith. So Moses was giving people faith, and here these people were representing that idea. They were tapped into that, and here they came back with not only without having faith, they were demonstrating something opposite of that. So the mere fact that Moses chose them, sent them, they were connected to Moses, Moses being the prince of the generation, that actually elevated them more and brought about a greater stature within themselves. And therefore, because they got so great, ironically, and therefore they wanted to remain in the desert, and they did not want to enter the land of Israel. Because entering the land of Israel would be for them a dissension, dropping down a few levels. They would have to descend from their lofty level and occupy themselves with physicality, physical, material things, like it says in the teachings of the Arizal, known as Lariana Kabbalah. Who look at the Torah Sham, the Alter Rebbe brings it in his mind. Look at the Torah V'nisvam Koyim Beit Chaim Bagos Tzemach Tzedek Sham. That Tzemach Tzedek actually gives the reference exactly where it's to be found in the Torah of the Arizal, in the Eitz Chaim. And that's written there. It's there in a note in the Mimer. The Sheiresh Hameraglim Hu Me'elam HaMachshova. It's explained that the root of the spies is from the world of thought. A person has three primary faculties, and that we have to devote them to God and godliness and what God wants us to do. Thought, speech, and deed. Machshava, dibur ma'aseh. The highest one is the thought process. So they were from this highest level. They were from the world of thought. Elsewhere, the Rebbe brings that it seems to be also that they're also from the world of speech, but they're not from the world of deed. So, serving in the land of Israel is an actual action and deed with material things, and like the verse tells us, when you get there, for 6 years you will plant your fields, and for 6 years you will prune your vineyards. Now this is a command of God, but nevertheless, the command is to occupy oneself with with agriculture, with physicality. You have to plant the field, prune the vineyard. And this occupation is for 6 years straight. And only afterwards, on the 7th year, you can rest up a little bit, learn, devote, and focus a little bit on Torah and on godliness, and when it's the sabbatical year. So this is busy. This was the claim of the Menachem Shomru when they said, "Efes ki az ha'om ha'yeshev be'orim." They said that indeed that the situation is that the people who live in these great cities are tough and bold. And they said it's a land a land that consumes its inhabitants, and totally makes them totally preoccupied. What does that mean? It consumes its inhabitants. Because the primary mitzvah in the land of Israel is to be occupied in physical, actual deeds in the agriculture. In physical things and actual deeds in work. And before the service, before you even do the mitzvah, you have to realize and focus on the fact that this is, even though it's physical, but this is holy, and you have to prepare yourself and have the right attitude and have the right focus. So you need to have a refinement and a clarification, and to elevate this material that you're working with. This is very, very physical, and then you have to work on that focus on devoting it for godliness. This is certainly proven by the mere fact that afterwards you perform the mitzvah, this becomes holy. This is a holy thing, and from the accomplishment that's done, this shows that how great it is. But the task is challenging. And therefore, once you're involved in these physical matters, it could bring someone down, someone who's preoccupied in them, lamata, to lower and lower. If you don't have the right focus, you don't do it for the right reason, you get distracted, etc. And even though this is the command of the Holy One, blessed be He, has stated, but they felt, their claim was, what their thinking was that they should be able to fulfill this in thought and in speech. They said, you know what, we don't have to get involved in nitty gritty. Let's explore this in the abstract. Let's explore this in its spiritual sense. That's what they wanted to do. Indeed, it's not totally off. It's not really totally inaccurate, because, like it explains in Chassidus and elsewhere, the mitzvahs are indeed in thought, speech, and deed. So the actual way we do it, that's where it's in deed. But there's also part of the process is the thought, and part of it is in the world of speech, the preparation, the study, etc. And especially these type of mitzvahs that are connected with the land of Israel. Especially if they're circumstantial, and especially if we're not able to do it even at times, then you don't have to do it. You learn about it. You still have this idea, but then there's times that they have to actually be performed. And this is the part that they didn't want to do. They wanted to only be involved in the thought part of it. Then they would have their cake and eat it, pun intended, because they actually wouldn't have the cake because they wouldn't be sowing and planting, etc. But they would have both advantages. They would have the advantage of the land of Israel and the advantage of the world of thought. They would have the whole idea of those mitzvahs, but not done in physical. But they would have the mitzvahs, and then the way they are in their highly lofty place in the thought. Therefore, they went to spy out the land, but the way it would be in their thought. They didn't want to go see in the nitty gritty and descend to the world of action, see how it could be done, how it could get done. There's a rule that action actually disturbs thought. In other words, you can think about something, when you start doing it, you can't think about it anymore because you're already doing it. So, action disturbs thought. Because of their root, they were so lofty rooted, they had it tough. They couldn't descend to the world of deed, and that was their downfall. The Gemara, the Mishnah Sanhedrin says there's a list of those who don't have a portion of the world to come. After it says that everyone has a portion of the world to come, they file the exceptions. Now there it means literally that they don't have a portion of the world to come. But elsewhere it's explained, and actually here in the footnote the 24, the Mevorchim here, if someone wants to look it up, Sefer HaSodom HaMoritz, Chigudin Beis, and Megalamukas Al Torah. Okay, so it explains this in an advantageous way, that they don't have a portion of the world to come. How could that be? Everyone has a portion. Chelik and Ma'abel, we're talking about. The portion of the world to come. The reason why they don't have a portion of the world to come is because of their stature, their advantage. They were higher. They came from such a lofty place. They were higher than the realm of the world. Even the world to come. Certainly they were higher than a portion, a part, a piece, a spot in the world to come. Actually, Tzemach Tzedek has it in one of his Memorim, in more than one Memorim actually, and that Tzemach Tzedek talks about it. But nevertheless, this was the mistake of the spies. Remember, there is a great advantage. Specifically, God wants us to descend to the world of action and deed. For this, they needed to get a revelation of light from a higher, a very lofty level. That's why Caleb and Joshua, they actually did have this level. They were also from that world, but they got this ray from the higher than even this world of Machshava. And therefore they said, the land is very, very good. Eem Chafetz Banu, and if God really wants us, etc., Zavas Chalav Udvash, flowing milk and honey. In the land there's the level of not just Moed, very, but very, very. Moed is all, with all the might, all strength. The word Moed, we say it in English very, but it means like I said, we say in the Shema, with all your own Moed, with all what you got. So all your might. Beis Moed, twice Moed. Which is higher than the ultimate of serving in the world of thought. What is this? This is the innermost and the crux and the main part of the pleasure. So sometimes people say there's pleasure centers, so the idea of pleasure in a satisfaction within a person, right? That's all based on how it is within God. So something which is higher than the thought is the pleasure, right? We talk about will and pleasure that are interchangeable. The will brings about the pleasure makes you have the will to bring the pleasure, etc. Now, it's an interesting thing that Rebbe points out here. Usually we say ratzon, raitze, which means he wants something, but then there's also chafetz. And these are two words in Lashon Kodesh, in the Holy Tongue, which have very similar idea. That is, when we say in English, you want something, or let's say if you really want it. And there are other synonyms, but sometimes the other synonym also has another nuance to what's being explained. So this is to want something very much, and it's like what you're proud of and what you want to have. Therefore, you say something is a hefts, it's something that an object that you want to have, because it's something that you appreciate. So let's see it inside. Eem Chafetz Banu, if God really wants us, the Chafetz in Yonu Pnimis Aratzon. Chafetz is the innermost of the will. This one thing comes into us. It says Chafetz Banu. He wants us. It goes into us that we should be able to bring it out. Be Israel. And it reveals this what's wanted within them. Until he elevates them to a level that you can't even differentiate between the two types of will, and the stronger will, and the chafetz and rotzen. Till here, this is more or less, the Rebbe says, what the Mevorchim says in the Maimer of the Alt Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek and the other Rabbeim. And that's explained there more at length, with more explanation. And like it says, that when you look inside, you get even smarter. In other words, if you really want, this is Rebbe's a nuance of the Rebbe saying, you could read it over there and learn it there, and to see what it actually says. But this is basically what it was. Now the Rebbe continues. Next page. We still have to understand. This was all good that they came from a high level and this, but how does that jive with the explanation that they're with what they really wanted, with the simple way of that what they did was a severe misdeed, and really was not wanted or appreciated by God. Like it says in the verses, like it says in the pasuk, God was upset, and etc. This was not good. And then, if you read the story, it says, God, we won't be successful. They got down to the level of saying, they said that the master won't be able to take out his vessels. In other words, meaning to say, heaven forbid, that God himself wouldn't be able to take care of this. So, and even the gossip of the land that they said, that even though we said before very nicely, there's such a thing called good gossip. Nevertheless, here, you know what the Torah says specifically? When it says that they died, it says those that let out the gossip about the land and that it was bad. So it was bad gossip. So how do you understand all these nice things that we said? And by the way, we'd understand this also from the quite stringent punishment that was meted out to them. You can see that what it says in the verse, and the Talmud actually describes it even more in more detail. And like it says in the Psalms, in the verses of L'chunei Ranana, which we say every Friday night, Psalm number 95, She'emim be'erev Shabbos, that we say on the evening, on Erev Shabbos, Hachisor and V'hapgam she'behan hogas deira midbar amaraglim. There we speak about the misdeed and the what was lacking in the conduct of the generation of the desert, the spies, right? Here's the Rebbe is of course referring to at the last couple of verses where it says that for 40 years they were in the they were in the desert, and they were going wayward, etc., etc. So and even in the Mishnah that we said they don't have a portion of the world to come, before we get to that nice thing to say that they come from a higher level, it means literally they don't have a portion of the world to come. The simple meaning is quite in a derogatory sense. They are lower than the world to come, not like we said higher than the world to come. You could possibly say, like Menachem says, when the Rebbe just says V'eshleimer, you can take it to the bank, but when he says it like this, you can take it to Fort Knox. The Rebbe says possibly, then it's certain. The explanation is Alpi Maimed Azal. And this is such a... I want everyone just take a look at this nuance for a moment, because this is a quote from the Yerushalmi, and the Rebbe only says the second half of the quote. The second half of the quote is here, Divrei Torah Ashirim B'mokim Acher. The words of Torah are wealthy elsewhere. You understand what the beginning of the quote is? I feel bad sometimes to say it because the Rebbe himself didn't want to say it. But it's an irony because we have to, in order to understand the beautiful nuance of it not being said, you have to know what it really says over there. So out of the script for a moment, it says there that the words of Torah are impoverished, they're poor in one place, and then elsewhere they're wealthy. Meaning to say, usually we say this, sometimes these are a theme that's repetitive or that's in several places, but sometimes it's expounded upon more. So we say here it's wealthy, there it's poor. You can see that nuance somewhere else. And even though there's something repetitive, but we say there's something new to learn when you see it in the rest of its context, something else. But here the Rebbe says, in other words, we'll understand this because the words of Torah are wealthy elsewhere. We'll understand this according to something which is explained in another discourse in the Likutei Torah of the Alter Rebbe, Sheyesh Begam Hagoyis Me'admur Tzemach Tzedek, which also has notations from the Tzemach Tzedek, his grandson, the third Rebbe, Ala Posuk. And what is this? What is that discourse on? On the verse when it says the story we're going to read in a few weeks. They got bit by a serpent. Then it says Vayas Meisha Nachash Nacheshes Vayasimeu Al Haneis. And Moses made a snake of copper, and he placed it up on a pole. And if it was that the snake bit a person, and he looked at the snake, the copper snake, and he lived. This is, by the way, there's a famous Mishnah that says it was their trust, that they trusted in God when they looked up, that was what brought about the healing, right? But here in Chassidic it explains that the looking at this copper snake that brought about the healing from the snake bite, that's because the snake, which is poisonous here, right? But the root of the snake, which is in the lower realm, is in the supernal snake, which is really good at its original point. Therefore, looking, we're able to draw down from where the root of the snake would be into the snake, which is in the lower realm. And through this, that's what ultimately brings about the getting rid of the what happens from the snake bite. And it makes it it nullifies whatever adverse effect of the bite of the snake. Or maybe and then there in the Maimer he talks about another explanation in the Talmud, which speak about two stories that there were some things that were adverse, and it says, but they had good intentions. So the Gemara says, Satan Penina l'shem Shemaim niskavnu. The Satan and Penina, they had their intent was for what they did. They intended really for the sake of heaven. So the Satan did that the Gemara is talking about is primarily the story of Job, and the story of Job was primarily preoccupied. The Gemara explains there that he was worried that he was so good that he would overtake our father Abraham. So therefore he says, he won't do it. And in the end, he of course does prove how great he was, but he went through whatever the story is. It's interesting, by the way, that we learn also in the Parshas of Chumash today, Job was around in the time of the spies, according to that opinion. And he had died, so that therefore he was keeping the evil people in the land of Israel in line. It's not here in the Maimer, but it's just an interesting side bar here. Anyway, so Job meant for the right. He didn't want to just the Satan didn't want to just take down Job, but he really meant well, so that he shouldn't take over for Abraham, who's our etc. That's number one. Then there was Penina. Penina, if you remember, she was the other wife of Elkanah, who was the husband of both Chana and Penina. We read about her on the first day of Rosh Hashanah. It's in the first chapter of Samuel. And Penina had all the children, and Chana didn't have children. But Chana was, Chana was more dear to Elkanah, and Penina used to chide her and tease her, etc. So the Gemara explains that she did that so that Chana should pray that she should have children. Nevertheless, so we'll read in the end of the song of Chana. It says in the derogatory that even the one who has many children ends up in a lousy state. Okay, the Lachayrin move on. So now this is not understood well, because there's another Gemara that also discusses what the Sultan did. Now, there the Sultan says that the Sultan it says who a Satan, who a Yitzhahara, who Malach. It's all one thing: Satan, the evil inclination, and the angel of death. And it says he brought about the destruction of the temple. That's what the Gemara says over there. He gave his eyes and he did lousy things. So what do you mean he meant good? He brought destruction. So he meant well. The road to nowhere is paved with good intentions. That's not what it says here exactly, but something along those lines. So that's what I was saying. The Gemara there says that. So how could you say he meant for a good intention? Well, that's a Penina. And what about Penina? The end of that, like we mentioned, the end of the song of Chana, it says the one who has many children, Lola, she was she had it tough. Meaning that she had a connection with the opposite of the good, etc., etc. This was not a good thing. So how do we say they meant it for the sake of heaven? So there, the Tzemach Tzedek explains what the Gemara says. How does the Gemara even say that? Vayar was a canal. The Hashem shall Satan upnina l'maylo v'chinas shem shemayim niskavnu. So the Tzemach Tzedek explains that the root of both the Satan and Penina in the supernal realms are from the level which is intended for the sake of heaven. Everything in the world, even the worst thing in the world, has a root in the most supernal realm, very high up. From there, everything is good. And it comes out good. Later it gets bad, but it's rooted only in good. Therefore, we're obligated to say that the things the way they are in their root in the supernal realms are good. There and then afterwards they fall down and they go in a chain and keep on descending. Parshas, till they become the Satan and Penina in the simplest realm where they did something lousy, bad, evil. Like it says there also in the Mimer. The parable of the harlot and the prince, son of the king, which is explained in the Zohar V'huva B'Tanya B'Kam Mekamis. It's also brought in several places in Tanya, the end of chapter 9 and the end of chapter 29. That there the Zohar explains what the Satan is. The Satan is like the harlot who was hired by the king to seduce the prince. So the harlot really wants that the prince should not succumb to her seduction, because she's a good subject of the king, and she wants to show how strong and the prince is. But she has to nevertheless do what the king asked her to do. So, but what's her intention? Her intention is that she should not be successful. So that's the idea of the Satan and the Yitzhahara, the evil inclination. That's part. God gave us free choice, and therefore gave us the choice of evil and good. But the evil in and of itself doesn't want to be followed. So, all her will and her deep will. Here the Rebbe uses both those terms again. Is that the prince should not succumb to her seduction. And from this she will have pleasure, and the king will have pleasure. be proud of him, etc. It's also brought in Tanya Shagam, the opposite forces cannot transgress the will of God, or what God wants and what God commands. And like Bilam, who was the prophet from of those forces, I cannot transgress and do something besides what the mouth of God says I could do. And like it says in Job, that their spirit keeps what his commands. In other words, they could only do, they cannot do anything besides what God allows. Just even the ones that are as deities, etc., they call God the God of the gods. In other words, he's the God. That's how it is written. That's only the root of the opposite side. But then it goes down in the chain, and it goes down to the actual evil inclination. The evil inclination wages war against the will of God. He comes down and says, do all kinds of stuff. And therefore it comes out that he's waging war against his root and his source. And this is the idea of looking at the copper snake which was on the staff, on the big pole. To look at the source and the root of the snake, of the lower snake, but look up where it's really coming from. Through this looking up, then we could bring down the root and the source of the snake to the realm where the snake is bad. Until it's recognizable in the snake down here, that its root and its source, and it'll be good. And look at the Rebbe says that a second time here, we can really, like Menachem says, take it. Not only take it to the bank, but take it to Fort Knox. We could say, and we could possibly, this same nuance that it says there about these other things, we could say the same thing about the spies. The same idea. Now that I was doing this comparative study from what the Chassidic says about explaining the Gemara about Penina and the Satan and the snake and for that matter Bilam, etc. All these things, we could say the same thing about the spies. The spies, in their root and their source, they came from the world of thought. To the extent that the Gemara has a very interesting story. Gemara Baba Basra, page 73. Here in the notation, it also brings from the Rebbe's father, who talks about this. But just very briefly, the story of one of the sages of the Gemara was going to the desert, and he met there a certain Arab, was able to see all kinds of things, and he came over so the story is longer. He had to talk to God. God regretted something, and they told him, the sages, when he recounted the story, gave him some criticism, whatever it was. But part of the story was that this guy says, let me show you where the spies are buried there in the desert. And he took a peek and he saw them. And he says, the Damu command the Mibsime. They looked like they were, well, sometimes we call that drunk, but it means after a good party of inebriation and of satisfaction, in a very happy state. That's what they looked like. Now, the story goes on there that they were wearing a prayer shawl, and he cut off one corner because he wanted to and then he couldn't move, and the Arab saw he's not moving. He says, "Did you take something with them?" He says, "Yeah." He says, "You put it back." Or else you're not moving. So he put it back, and the sages asked him, "Why did you take it?" He says, "I wanted to see if you have to have, if the halacha is like Beis Hillel or Beis Shammai. You want to see how many strands it has to have with the blue and the white, etc." There was a reason for it. So they told him, "Why don't you just look?" etc. And that's when they gave him some more criticism, etc. That's an interesting Gemara if you want to check it out. Anyway. Shahu inyan hatainuk shalamayla. But what were the spies laying there? And even after all these years, and when this sage saw this, now don't ask exactly the mechanics of this story, because that's beyond our pay grade. But this is what he saw, and this is what he related, and this is how it's explained. So they were laying like that after a good party, because that's the idea of pleasure. Hatainuk shalamayla. That's the supernal pleasure of God that was being reflected on their faces, even though this was after their whole story. They're also called the generation of the desert, the Midbar Yonehu Sfiris HaKeser. The desert is the idea of Keser. Remember this, which we spoke about it several times. Keser is, before we get into the attributes of all the 10, the 3 intellectual and the 7 emotional, the Chochmah, Bina, wisdom, and understanding, which bring about the result, which is Das. Sometimes Keser is included with them, because it's the mere fact that there's going to be a process, and there's going to be a relationship with God. But this is the idea of the crown, which is higher than anything, and it's this part where it straddles between God's essence and the mere fact that there will be something in a creation. So it's in the rawest state, right after the pristine state of God, but that there will be relation to creation. So there, the idea of the desert is undeveloped. So usually we say the desert is a lousy place because no one can inhabit it. It has rough elements. But here the Rebbe says, and Asher lo yoshev adam sham. We say about it that a person can inhabit it there, but there it's Lamal Yusa. Here it's for not in a derogatory sense, but in a praiseworthy sense. L'maylam chinas adam, because it's higher than humanity. It's pristine still. But from there it goes down to the idea of desert in general, that it's a derogatory thing, to the level of the people who dwell in the desert also in a derogatory state because of what they did. That's why also in these discourses that explain the idea of the spies, that's why it talks there in these discourses about their advantage, their innermost of a part, not the story in its raw state where they did something evil. Because it's talking about the root of their soul, which is in the world of thought. Because now we can understand where the mistake was and where it was rooted in its good. So when they said this is a land that consumes its inhabitants, etc. Excuse me. It was impossible for them to descend from the world of thought to the world of deed. They weren't able then to elevate and refine the physical things. From this it went down further to their claim, which was of course a negative thing that they did. It was a sin. They said etc. What they said. What's the reason that we only speak about their advantage? But because ultimately, even though it came out in a real bad way, but a person's true self is their innermost, which is their good. And this is just a lesson before we even go further. You see, we have to focus on the real potential. It's too bad. What happened. But the Chassidus still discusses and chooses to dwell on what not only could have been, but where the root is, and therefore we could work on taking things the way it is in the root, not let it degenerate, and etc. Look at Psak. Now, the Rambam has the ruling. When a person says, I don't want to do, which is something which is the right thing to do, in certain laws, it says you can force them to do it. You force him until he says, okay, I do want to do it. Then you say, okay, he did it by his own free will, even though he only did it because he was getting beaten up or something like that. But we say the reason why it's true is because his real will is anyway they should do the right thing. It's not only, it's more famous about something else, about forcing someone to divorce. We've discussed it here, this idea, this nuance, but it's that Rebbe brings it here, that it's also, it says certain offerings have to be brought because you want to bring it. They could do the same thing for that. When you bring that by your will you should slaughter the offering, that when it offers the offering, the offering is very great, extremely so. The secret of the mystery of the offering goes up to the secret of the infinite. The way that works. This shows us that the real part of the person is their innermost, not what you see on the surface. The true, what he really wants, even if he doesn't even know he wants it. It just needs to be forced a little bit. We force him to uncover and reveal his true will. And since in the deeper sense the thought process and the claim of the spies was because they're from the world of thought, therefore the Chassidus explains their advantage. So it's not to negate how terrible it was what they did, but we also want to look at their root. Now here, this square brackets, you'll see at the end of it, it says any boror, the one when this mimer was transcribed by those that transcribed what the Rebbe said on Shabbos. This piece was a little bit tough for them to understand even afterwards, after the discussion, but they wrote it as best they could. So let's learn it. V'adrab, on the contrary. So we said that the Rebbe said that we're dwelling on something, even though they did something bad, but we're looking at them how they are good. That still doesn't make so much sense. So because of their root in the world of thought, the root wants that it should go down to the world of action. And the supernal will of God should be fulfilled. That should go down and refine the world of action. So then the spies mess something up here, even according to this. Therefore, the way they are down here, they were really fighting with their root because they didn't do in the end where their soul was rooted. But it's not clear exactly this nuance of the explanation, and maybe it's also not clear exactly how, because it's still hard for us to understand how they made such a mistake if their root was so high. And this is what their disagreement of the 10 spies with Yeshua and Kalev. That's similar to the disagreement of the house of Shammai, the house of Hillel, in halachic ideas. When Beis Hillel says something is permissible, according to them, they felt that this is something which is permissible and able to be elevated and refined to the supernal realm, refined and elevated to the supernal realm. The word mutter, by the way, means it's not tied up. Osir, which means forbidden, means it's tied up. It's tied up to the other forces. It can't be then elevated. And mutter means it's loose, it's untied, and therefore it could be elevated. It means permissible. And therefore all your deeds, in a way that all your deeds are for the sake of heaven. You know God in everything that you do. In all your ways you know Him. And then this is the dictum that we make for God, a dwelling place here in this world, in this broad good land, the holy land of the whole world. Well, Divri B'Shamai Hine Eisa Hadover Hu Osir. But according to Bei Shammai, that thing is forbidden. In other words, when they say something's permissible, it's not even talking about a mitzvah, let's say. They're saying something is permissible, and therefore you could serve God with it. Bei Shammai says, no, that thing's forbidden. Therefore, it's not able to be elevated. Hainu Shehu Osir V'Kosher, it is tied up and bonded, therefore it's impossible to elevate it. On the contrary, like it's explained in Tanya, so we know if somebody eats something and then they study Torah, they serve God, so they elevate what they ate. If you ate an apple or you ate a piece of meat, and it gets the most elevated when you ate it for that sake of having energy to study. But let's say you forgot to have that and you were enjoying the apple, but nevertheless you studied, you could elevate it anyway because you did something good, you got the energy. Let's say somebody, God forbid, ate something that was forbidden to eat. Then it's still, even though you studied afterwards, that stuff doesn't get elevated. That until the Mashiach will come, it can never, it's tied up and it can never get elevated, even though you did something that the source of that energy still remains tied into the other side, to the klippa. So he says, not only can it get elevated, if somebody ate something, even if they study Torah, it still degrades them and brings them down. So not only, so even though if somebody studied Torah with the power, with the energy that they got from that food, etc., it's still impossible to elevate it. And on the contrary, the forbidden thing, the forbidden food, degrades and denigrates the person to a lower level. Getting back to connecting this to the story of the spies, this is like they said, so to speak, the master cannot take out his vessels, meaning questioning the ability of God. Heaven forbid. The fact, why couldn't he take out the vessels from there? This is God made it that way. This is His will, that he shouldn't break his own will. He himself set it up that way, that you can't. So God said that food, let's say, will be stuck, not elevated. This idea that the spies said that the master cannot take out his vessels mishum from there. This is like the ruling of Beis Shammai and their thought process. They forbade something that Beis Hillel said is permissible. You could take this to the bank. And you could say, you could also understand that which the sages speak about the idea of, and I shall be sanctified b'seich b'nei Yisrael amongst the people of Israel. That's the idea of sanctification of God's name. Ironically and interestingly, that the whole idea of the primary sanctification of God's name, both when you're threatened to do something wrong and you're not allowed to do it because it would be a desecration. But there's a different law if it's in the presence of 10 people. So the idea of sanctifying, and when sanctifying God's name, it's also in the presence of 10 people. So, where do you learn that out from? Because it says amongst the children of Israel. The Gemara explains that it says the word here, v'nikdashti, and I will be sanctified b'soich, in the innermost, but this word toich, amongst, it means within. And it says that word by Kiddush Hashem, by sanctification of God's name. And it also says it, and here, look, this is another tough group. This is a trip. You have to. There's a train here of 3 things here, right? I'll be sanctified in Toich. Toich is an Eida, a group. How much is the group? 10. Now, wait a minute. We don't know yet about 10. We first know that the word Toich is associated. This is an association game with the word Eida. Who's the first Eida? That was Koirach. Koirach is also called an Eida. It says twice the Eida. These group of spies is called the Eida, and the Koirach and his buddies is called the Eida. Now, there by Koirach it says Toich, where it says Admosel. Now, there it says he badlu mitoich Eida. Moses warns everyone, get away from amongst these people because they're going down. Right? So there it says the word mitoich. Now, when it says ha'eda there, what's ha'eda? Oh, ha'eda. So here it says, so now let's take the word ha'eda. That's what it says about the spies. Ad moshe la'eda haro hazois. Till when will this evil group? So now we know that was 10, because 2 of them were good, right? There was 12 spies sent, 10 said the bad thing. So now the Torah follows the 3 words. Toich, 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 ha'eda is 10. B'meraglim. So that was the 10 of the spies. L'chayra hu pele. It's really a wondrous way of learning. Look at the irony here that Rebbe says. Look what's the wonder here. You're going to learn out how you have to sanctify God's name from the desecration of God's name, which was done by this group of spies, that this was 10 of them. Isn't that ironic? As a matter of fact, we see this from what they said, the spies. Now, this is already what Moses is saying. What are the people going to say? That God couldn't do what they said he can't, and then it'll be believable by the people. Right? Because when Moses tells God, it's not going to be good PR for you, God. God doesn't have the ability, like he says, he wouldn't be able to take out his vessels, and it's the idea of a rebellion, like Joshua and Caleb tells them, don't rebel. This would be something rebellious. How does it make sense that we should learn about the sanctification of God's name that has to be with 10 from amongst Israel from this group of 10 of the spies? This is very tough to understand. The Yisrael came more than that. And this group of the 10 were the ones who specifically said the evil gossip. And call of Yeshua not even included. If it would count all the spies, then they would be there. Then it would say you need 12 people. 12 for a minion, right? But it's 10. Why? Because those 2 did something good. So just the 10 bad guys. But now we understand, because what was the source? So higher up, they were very holy. So that's where you could learn Kiddush Hashem from there. That's where you could learn anything from there. That's where you learn a minion from here. Because in the innermost, in the root, the claim of the spies was the sanctification of God's name. They were talking about how great and lofty God is. Just the problem was that wasn't the main intent, etc., as we've discussed. But actually, and therefore it came down and degenerated and descended in an opposite way into something not good. All this is the part of the discussion before the halachic ruling is issued. Like the ruling of the halacha after they have the 2 sides of the disagreement of Beisham and Bisil. But after the ruling was ruled, like Moses and Aaron said, hey, we're going to Israel anyway. That's what God said so. And everything's going to be good. So we have to go to the land of Israel. The ruling was like the opinion of Joshua, Caleb and Joshua. Indeed, like they said, the world is our land is very, very good. If God really wants us, will take us into the land flowing milk and honey. There's this good, it's a greater advantage, not just like the spies thought, but indeed the greatest advantage is to descend into the world of action of a dafka b'zeh ilim the made. And then you have this elevate, you're able to go to the supernal realm of very, very much, because the ultimate is brought out to take the physical and elevate it to the spiritual. The chafetz avaya, this advantage of the gods, what God really wants in the innermost of His pleasure and will. Maybe the will of God that now we are in the desert of the nations, and especially especially in the times of the heels of Mashiach Yikuyim Gam Bonuin. It should be fulfilled with us, this idea. Ma'ilasa Asiyah Sheba Asiyah will have the advantage of action within action, the lowest realm. Through this we bring out the ultimate, what God wants out of the world. To the extent to the level of that God wants us, we make a dwelling place for Him specifically in these lowest realms. Through this we merit speedily, immediately to the coming of our righteous Mashiach, speedily be Ameinu in our days, mamish, actually so. L'chaim, l'chaim.